Welcome everybody back to another episode of Park Rex. Today we've got Brett Galvin and Brett Wood, and we're going to call Brett Galvin BG today just so it doesn't get too confusing.
Hi everyone.
But this is another episode of kind of the deep tech kind of theme we were going through, but as everything, I think we might get derailed into talking about coronavirus today a little bit, but why not? Everyone else is talking about it.
I think it's a super important topic to sort of talk through.
Yeah, no doubt.
And look,
you can't turn anywhere without seeing it today. So yeah, absolutely.
Not a lot of people are talking about the implications of parking, but I think it's important. I think it'll be a huge change to the way we do business. If you like, Leicester, I'll just give a few stats about what I'm hearing here. Air travel.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Air travel, as you know, it'll dry up pretty quickly with potentially with what's happening, closing the borders, in fact, on some jurisdictions. I'm also hearing, getting supplies where we have a global supply chain. Those things are starting to slow down already. So implications for current projects are certainly will be tricky. It'll have to be monitored. But socially, we're looking at the projections here are that 1 in 5 people will get some form of the disease or get the disease. And we're starting to see obviously huge changes politically and regulatory to try and boost the economy. We've had significant falls overnight and continued falls on the share market. So investment, it's hard to predict things, but I saw a graphic today that the intention of sort of communicating into the marketplace is to smooth out the net effect of how many people catch this quickly, so we can sort of manage it in a reasonably sensible way rather than it all hitting at once. So 1 in 5 people will get it. We want to have a look at maybe drops in earnings, it drops in the potential people coming into the city, people self-isolating, so encouraging schools to close, encouraging air travel to slow down. People intertraffic was cancelled. I don't know if you've heard that. Or people have chosen not to go on their own volition.
No, it was cancelled.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we were all planning on going over there, and all the trade shows have been canceled essentially.
All the sporting events today, right where I'm from, the Grand Prix looks like it'll be cancelled. Sporting events globally effectively cancelled. So parking and events, obviously that's completely changed now.
Wow.
Have a think about hospital parking. I think that'll be an interesting area to talk about, what things can happen there to sort of smooth out capacity. Municipalities, city centres, people with no longer going into work in the city, and cities and what that looks like as a changing dynamic. So very interesting times. I'd love to talk to you both just about it, what you think people can do, and where we go from here. What I'm hearing is people are planning this to be a 3-month thing rather than a 6-month thing or a 12-year thing. So how we negotiate these next couple of months really is the question. Yeah. Brett, we haven't spoken to you much. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean,
what are you hearing?
We're getting we're getting a little bit less on the statistic front on our end, just in terms of what the true magnitude is going to be, and I think it's just because we haven't wrapped our arms around it yet. But the thing that there's a couple of scary things, and then there's some opportunities in there that we probably have to think about. From a doing business perspective, our world is about to change. We're about to see a lot of people move into the world of remote working that have traditionally been, brick and mortar desk style working. And I've had the benefit of being a remote worker for several years now, and it's an easy transition. But I think the thing that intrigues me is what happens on the back end of this. 3 months, 6 months from now, Do we see those people go back to a brick and mortar? Do we see businesses realize the value of remote working and being able to use a lot of the technology we have today, and it changes the way our offices are set up? And when I think about it from a parking perspective, you think about the revenue associated with monthly parking and employee parking. Are we about to see that dramatically change? Are we about to see people change the way they work, change the way they telecommute, and does that significantly impact parking revenue? And I've been working all over the U.S. for the past several years, and just like almost every other business in the U.S., parking has been booming. We've been seeing revenues go up. We've been seeing continued growth, and there was always the expectation that there was going to be some disruption economically, but not this fast. And this sudden, and what does that do not only to revenue from a parking perspective, but then programmatic operational costs, staffing, those types of things. So there's a lot to unpack there, a lot to really think about, but it concerns me because we've been designing these programs based on the way they've generated revenue currently, and we may see a shift in that rather quickly that was unexpected.
You guys have been thinking about this a lot more than I have. I mean, just kind of thinking about all the ramifications of all that, man, it's going to cause some major disruptions. Every parking operator with a budget they were planning on hitting for this year is going to have to rethink all of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, with 2 months, I mean, let's say it's 2 months of disruption and not 3, that's still, a large portion, that 20% of your overall, 15% of your overall budget for the year. So it's hard to recover that, especially when you're losing things like, March Madness, where, these cities are expecting to bring in large amounts of event revenue. It's hard for that to recover for any business. And parking is just, it falls right in that spectrum.
I tell you, if you weren't a successful business during the economy the way it's been going, if you were struggling during that time, it's going to be pretty challenging.
How do you guys feel about starting a new business on the day that a pandemic hits? So
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah. So,
well, I think you have to look at your opportunity here to try to help some of those people kind of manage that, right? So how quickly do they need to adjust budgets?
Crisis management. Yeah.
Can they shut down different?
Yeah.
So maybe you can even shut down different parking facilities. Mm-hmm. In a city, if they're going to be an overall reduction, so you can reduce the staff levels.
Well, I mean, I talk about this sometimes. I mean, I'm a big fan of right-sizing parking from a space perspective and even from an operational perspective. I mean, just like any business where we think about brick and mortar going away and doing more remote working, if this is successful, we're going to be in the same place with parking. We may be able to do more with less, and this may be an opportunity that coming out of this, programs get to look at how do we operate, what are the spaces that we have, and how do we make this work more functionally. But again, it's all about weathering the storm, whether it's a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it may be. It's getting through that.
I think we have to be pragmatic about staff as well. So staff to service things, staff to collect things, staff to go around and monitor things. Potentially that gets tricky as well. You have to be pragmatic. It's obviously a situation that you don't plan for necessarily on this sort of scale. So a human-centered response there, and in terms of what you can do, and making sure you're communicating, I think is important. Particularly, simple signage. Parking is being cleaned. We have Purell on our car parks, and just simple basic messaging I think helps in the interim. There's some of the thoughts that initially come to mind. Certainly planning. So I think a 20% drop, that's a huge hole in sort of municipality budgets. It's a huge drop in airport-based revenue, which flows onto the tax pool. Really interesting implications for us to sort of think through. Right sizing is a perfect idea. Maybe you change temporarily you change some of the modes of operations as well. People using public transport, maybe we see an increase in private car use based on what we see happening. Rather than people riding public transport, people choose to drive. So it could have some inverse effects as well.
Yeah, I didn't think about it that way either. I'll tell you what, though, that if I'm a parking operator, I'm going to every single hospital in the city, and I'm offering to do parking management or even start charging for valet or charging for parking at the hospitals. That sounds terrible, but I mean,
they'll need solutions. So
Well, I mean-
critically, potentially emergency levels, then people will need to. They'll need some sort of form of parking management at those bases, at those hospital
I
centers.
mean, I think it goes beyond.
Yeah.
It goes beyond just the base of the hospital too, because in a place where we are quickly accelerating towards the capacity of our beds and our ICUs, you saw China in Wuhan, they're building more hospitals, and for us, that's largely, stabilizing and building temporary hospitals in surface parking lots around the facilities. And so now it's systematic parking management of assets that they don't even own. And how do we bring all of that together under one roof to serve the greater good of getting people there and keeping them safe?
Interesting times for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
yeah, no doubt.
And the implications across the US. What are you sort of hearing today? At the close of it'll be the close of the week, and things will. I think when we come back on Monday, things may look substantially different. What are you hearing? What's the sort of the latest that the people on the ground are hearing there?
Well, my kids are going to be, their class is going to be potentially, they're preparing us for doing homeschooling. They're going to be literally using Zoom meeting to do class from home. I mean, fortunately, my wife doesn't work, but it's going to disrupt me working from home, that's for sure. I got kids trying to go to school from home.
Sure.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, we're also seeing we've seen a lot of the corporations, bring their workforce into the remote work early on, especially in the Seattle area in California. Now we're seeing major universities across the U.S., closing temporarily and moving to that remote classroom, just like Leicester's kids.
Yeah. And
one of the things that's interesting about that is, we've been doing transportation demand management for universities for, the past couple of years. And one of the biggest things is telework. So we kind of get to see how it works and if it's something that's realistic. But from our perspective, I mean, I think we're gonna see a pretty big increase over the next week or two in just the scale of this thing as we really get our arms around it. And the key is going to be, our folks, the parking management, the private operators, kind of assisting in the facilitation of transitioning into this new period of remote work and supply management and all those types of things in roles they likely wouldn't be in traditionally. City parking professionals are likely going to be in a role where they're trying to do crisis management as well, and it's tricky times.
I would say the interesting outcome of this 3 months' time, the way retail works, the way major shopping hubs work, I think that'll be the area that will change. I know that they've sort of already prepared for it, trying to make the experience as safe as possible, handing out masks and making sure that you have your hand sanitizer available throughout the facility. But as that increases, that area that was challenged already, or that sector that was challenged already, I think that changes a lot. Because in the change,
how quickly do you think the economy bounces back?
Yeah, well, I think
you
still have the trick is to this, which is explain the economics of this. You still have the demand that you always have. There's no change in demand, but what is happening is the change in supply potentially changes significantly at the outset, and then demand changes subsequently at the back of it. So we have been through these things before. We've had MERS and SARS before. So the potential is always there that we moderate this, or we find ways to effectively quarantine what's happening. But at this point in time, there's certainly a lot of questions to be answered, unknowns, I guess, not questions to be answered, unknowns about the impact and I don't want to say hysteria, but it has that sense of, potentially let's go and build a dugout and store food about it, and I guess in a way that I haven't experienced before. with events being cancelled and things like that, that really hits home in a way.
It does. It was interesting. My wife and I were talking about this over the weekend, but the last one of these that we had was in 2009 with H1N1, the swine flu, and I don't recall there being this level of, just concern about it. There obviously was a level of concern, but not to the point that we ran out of toilet paper before it ever hit. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with just our reliance on social media for news. And obviously that's pushing us into a place where everything we read may not be completely accurate, and we end up kind of pushing further past what the truth is and into a panic mode. And I'm hopeful that at a certain point that all kind of satiates and we get to a place where we understand what's going on, and we can control some of the hysteria that's been popping up for the past week or two here in the States.
Oh, yeah. The next...
I don't remember anything like this ever happening before. I mean, this just seems like a completely foreign from anything I've ever even remotely. We have less than 1,000 cases in the U.S., and we're closing schools.
Yeah.
I mean, that even seem realistic? How many cases are there in Australia? It's like under 100, I thought, when I looked at it.
I think it changes every day. I think we don't know the true number. That's the thing. People, you only know when you fully get the symptoms, and you're contagious or you've contracted something a while before you have that. So there's a lead in time for these types of things. And I'm obviously no expert at it. I'm an armchair quarterback at this sort of thing, but yeah. I think there's a potential there that there's a lot more people infected at the moment, and it's a matter of time where it just spreads and spreads. So the mortality rate is obviously not as high.
That is the scary part.
It's not as high as some of the other outbreaks, but it is still high, and it does affect people. But it's the self-isolating factor of this. So the recommendation is obviously when you get it or you get near it, or even beforehand, try not to go to places where you might be infected or might come in contact with other people. Don't shake people's hands. That sort of thing it's an interesting social change as well for us. Not as much, but I think we're reasonably prepared. Just the messaging has been that 1 in 5 people will get this. Potentially, I don't know what the hospitalization rate is based on when you get it. Does everyone have to go to hospital, or is it just a certain fraction of people? So, I don't know enough about it, but in terms of the implications on parking, let's sort of dial, I guess, back into that. I think the financial implications are significant. So what was, Leicester touched on it, what was profitable before may not be profitable again in the same way. So some of those assets might need to be relooked at, repurposed.
So if I'm a city or a parking operator or one of those entities, what do I do to replace some of this revenue for the year? How do I keep my budget safe for the year?
I don't think I don't think you replace it all, but I mean, I think you look for other opportunities to monetize things, and not in a way that you're taking advantage of people or anything like that, but there's so much that goes on at our curbs and our facilities that we just have to change the way we do business. I mean, and we've been doing that as an industry for several years now, where it's no longer about just the monthly parker, but let's serve the people that need it, and let's find ways to repurpose our space to be efficient and economical and generate some level of revenue. And even if it's not a one-to-one replacement of what you're losing from a meter or parks or systematic or event revenue, it offsets it somewhat. And then, again, have a plan in place for when this is over, how to drive business back into your facilities and regenerate that revenue, and just understand that you may take a loss on a couple of things this year from a few months perspective, but it's about structuring that business when you get back out of it.
Have a think about what you might need to do in terms of configuration of your rate structures, configuration of your car parks, and preparing for that early. That might be an interesting thing if you're going to offer some free periods, so a different rate regime, closing down some of the car parks that no longer need to keep operational because there's not that space there. The other thing that come to me is I'm not necessarily wanting to pay physically for things anymore. So mobile phone, I want to pay for things as much as possible via my mobile phone. So I think those things, rather than interacting with a pay machine or a meter, I'd rather do that. I'm just, fearful of that sort of thing. I think that could I'm not personally fearful, but I can imagine that people might be,
Right.
We're talking about percentages. People might tend to gravitate towards mobile interactions a lot more. It's really interesting.
Well, I mean, in the move of the industry to automated transactions and automated experiences in the off-street environment and the mobile pay and the on-street environment, you're exactly right. I mean, we have the opportunity. I saw one firm today that does contactless payment, and they were offering free setup for contactless payment in cities right now because it reduces the need to touch equipment, which is one less touch point of anything public facing. So there could be a very big shift in the technology and the way that we apply those in our cities and campuses.
Leicester, one of the other ones that you mentioned, when you went to the airport, the price of the flight has changed markedly, and so I guess the same would need to occur in the parking sphere close to airports as well, to sort of support that whole industry.
I was on a flight last week too, and it's the emptiest I've seen flights in a while. So the plane was about 60% full, and usually that cattle car going back from LAX to you got the coronavirus sword?
Yeah, I've got some cups.
No, but the LAX to IAD, that's usually just a packed flight every time. You're lucky if you got a couple open seats, and there was plenty of room.
I would assume that the converse of that, I mean, for folks that are driving to the airports, if the flights are 60% full, huge hit on the parking garages and off-site parking and Uber, Lyft revenue and curbside revenue too. So
yeah,
I just thought about that.
Yeah, I like the. I mean, just thinking about the effect of people not taking public transport yet still going into work, still going into the city and all that. I mean, that actually has a potential to do some offset.
It does.
I don't know how much, but
it's an interesting conversation.
We'll
An interesting problem that we face ourselves with over the coming weeks. It's certainly, with the cancelling of events, it means that people can listen to more quality podcasts.
That's true. That's true.
No doubt.
We've sort of gone 23 odd minutes. Do you want to keep talking about the topic, or we sort of, in Australian terms, we've flogged the horse to death?
Oh, I think
people
we're
probably
good.
sick
We
about
talked about coronavirus enough.
Yeah.
If we were to wrap up, I think, so projects move sideways. Service might be more difficult to access, so make sure you're talking to the people that you need to make sure your asset is serviceable. Have a look at the staffing implications, both your communication to your own staff, but also accessing how staff can work and what their signage. I guess signage is another thing, and sort of prepare for the other side of this, and when the configurations come back to sort of a normalized new norm, then look to plan to do what you can in the meantime to prepare for that.
I'm personally worried about them shutting down freight.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in the parks world, so my product gets shipped out of Europe.
Yeah.
I'm very personally concerned about it. I mean, pretty much most parks manufacturers in the U.S. or that sell into the U.S. are getting their product from somewhere else.
Yeah, correct.
So it's going to be challenging. Hopefully not.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Parker X podcast. We sincerely appreciate it and hope you are enjoying our content. Please remember to rate, review, comment, subscribe, and share. And follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The following has been a production of Parker X.